All right, welcome into Appeal to Heaven. I'm your host, Jonah Schultz. Thank you so much for joining me here today. We got a lot to dive into, and as the saying goes, if you don't think that the United States is capitulating enough to Israel, just wait 30 minutes. That's been the way it's been going for as long as I can remember, as long as I've been alive, and seemingly more and more by the day. And we are now in a period of time where we really don't know what the hell is going on. Right? We've been in Iran now for going on 3 weeks. We just had last night the South Pars oil fields being bombed by Israel. Trump is now saying we had no notification of this. We had nothing to do with it. There is very much happening now that is creating a void for chaos, for destruction, and for some very, very bad results for the United States. And so I'm not going to do a deep dive into military strategy or what's going on necessarily even in Iran right now. What I want to focus on is what I focus on every single episode, which is what we are doing, is what Trump is doing, our government policy, our cultural shifts. Are those America first? Are those in the interests of the people who actually live here, the native-born American citizens? We're going to get into Joe Kent, obviously. That's in the big news of the week. Joe Kent resigning from his post. We'll dive into that a little bit. But the first issue I want to get into, I think the biggest story of the past couple days of what's an ongoing story that will continue is the Pentagon will now be seeking $200 billion in additional support for Israel's war in Iran, the war of aggression in Iran that we are a part of. This is being reported by the Washington Post. Has been confirmed by Secretary of War Pete Hegseth as well. $200 billion. Now, we live in this era where these figures get thrown around like crazy, right? We had the COVID bailout situation where we had nearly $2 trillion spent during that period of time on God knows what. We talk about $10 billion here, $100 billion there, and the whole sense of perspective on money has gone totally out the window. And for perspective on this figure, $200 billion, that's more than the already obscene amount that of the $185 billion, roughly, that Congress allocated for the war in Ukraine. How many Republicans and conservatives like myself have been pounding the table saying, no more money for foreign wars, no more money for Ukraine, no more money to fight battles 3,000 miles, 6,000 miles away? How much time and energy have we spent talking about how Europe needs to pick up the tab? But that never applies to anywhere else. That never applies to Israel. And now we're discussing $200 billion, right? The war that we were told is essentially over already. We have been told by the president, by the administration, that Iran's Navy, their Air Force, their missile capabilities, everything has been totally obliterated and has been for weeks. And yet we are seeking $200 billion in additional funds for this war. So let's put this in perspective. $200 billion. This is a lot of money. I know, like I said, things get thrown around a lot. We're $39 trillion in debt. $200 billion is very difficult for us peasants to comprehend. Right? Those of us who go out and we work every day, right? We pay taxes, we pay our utilities, we got our wife, we got our kids, maybe you're a single person, you got your grocery bill, your gas bill, everything's going up. $200 billion to you, it's like something that can't possibly even exist, right? $200 billion, you can't fathom the amount of money that truly is. But let's put that in perspective by illustrating what could the government do with $200 billion that we are now asking for the war in Iran. According to the government's own estimates of roughly $17,000 per individual, we could deport nearly 12 million illegal immigrants living in the United States with $200 billion. 12 million. We just deported this last year 300,000. 300,000. No mass deportations, but if we took this money, maybe we could get some. We could build a border wall 11 times. We asked Congress for $17 billion for the border wall. Do you remember this? Back in 2016, Trump 1.0, we tried to get $17 billion for the border wall, but Republicans said, that's too steep. That's a little bit too steep. We can find $185 billion to send to Ukraine, but $17 billion for a border wall, that's a little steep. With this $200 billion, you could fund the entire state budget of Ohio for 2 years. For 2 years. Think about that. Ohio, one of the larger states in the union, over 11 million people who live in this state. You could fund everything that goes on in this state from the government standpoint for 2 years with $200 billion. That's an insane amount of money. And when you put it in even more perspective, the state of Ohio overspends on nearly everything. So that's including the pork and the fat and all of the excess spending that doesn't even need to exist. Let's get a little bit more onto the micro level. You could give every family in the age range of 25 to 34, every single family, every single young family in the United States, you could give them $10,000 for a down payment on a home. Of all these countless millions of young families, of young individuals who are striving, who are saving, who are doing everything they can, you could give each of them $10,000 for a down payment on a home. Or you could give every single family, every single married couple in this country, you could give $3,500 cash. Every single married couple. We could even pay the out-of-pocket expenses for childbirth for 67 million babies. 67 million babies. The average out-of-pocket cost is about $2,500 to $3,000 per kid. With $200 billion, you could pay for 18 years worth of American births in this country. 18 years worth. How many mouths could be fed? How many veterans could be helped? How many police could we hire? The infrastructure in this country, how many airports could we improve? How many bridges could we fix? How many potholes could we fill? How much could we improve the civic infrastructure of this country with $200 billion? Or, this is a crazy one right here. Seeing as how we are $39 trillion in debt, we could just not spend the $200 billion. We could just maybe try not to get to $40 trillion in debt. We could just not spend the $200 billion that we don't have on a war for Israel. Just this chunk alone, to put things in perspective even further, could accelerate inflation by 0.5%. So not only is this taking $200 billion that could be used elsewhere, or not used at all, this is actually a direct tax on you and me. This money that we don't have, that we have to borrow or print, is going to make our lives worse, is going to make our dollar worth less, is going to make it more expensive to go to the store. Obviously, this isn't even touching on the direct consequences like gas that are already getting more expensive. But because we decide to go to war on behalf of Israel in Iran, your life just got more expensive. It just got worse. So not only is the government not doing anything to benefit you, it's actively making your life worse. And all of this is for what? What is the benefit that we are reaping from $200 billion, from this war in Iran? Right? I'm as anti-communist, as anti-socialist as it gets, but you have to kind of wonder, wonder why there's been this growing socialist movement in the United States. I can tell you why. Because we find money for everything else. We find energy for everything else. We find the political will for everything else except the needs and the desires of American citizens. Think about it this way. You have somebody, to say in my age group, 30 years old, maybe they're in their 20s or their 30s, That's where the kind of desire for a more socialist approach to governance has taken place. That group of people has only ever seen their government spend, 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 spend. Spend on war, spend on bailouts, spend on massive government spending packages. They've seen that their entire life. But they have never reaped any of the benefits. They've not seen any decrease in costs in their healthcare. They've not seen decreased costs in their education. They've not seen it easier to afford a home or to raise a family or to do any of the things, the basic things that we once took for granted in this country that was the bottom line expectation. The bare minimum expectation in this country was that if you just went to work and had a basic full-time job, you could raise a family, buy a home, afford healthcare, send your kids to school. On a single income, by the way. But we've been told when it comes to those things, there's no money. But when it comes to wars, especially wars for Israel, there's endless money. Endless, bottomless money. Except for what we need when we need it the most. So you wonder why people are getting the urge to say this system sucks? That's why. Take a look in the mirror, GOP. You've handed it over to them. And the system that we're living in is not any kind of capitalist system. We live in this crony system where the cash is siphoned and filtered to corporations, to the mega donors. And it's the average people who shoulder the burden for keeping the system going. So this is a snapshot of just this $200 billion of what it really means. And why this type of reckless attitude and this total disregard for the American citizens is driving people to, I guess, either end of the spectrum. It's driving people far to the left or it's driving people far to the right. And I can't necessarily blame either group. I can look at the far left and I can say, you're wrong because the system that you're advocating for doesn't work, and I can demonstrate all of that. But can I be angry with them for saying we need some sort of radical change to the system? No, I can't be angry about that. I can say you're a moron because you want to trans the kids, and you hate Christianity and you hate white people and you want to flood this country with immigrants, right? Immigrants that are making your cost of living way, way more expensive. And that's the whole other part of this is, well, we're the ones paying for it. You know, you got these illegals going to the emergency room, taking advantage of our healthcare system, our education system, our welfare system, and illegal immigrants as well taking advantage of our welfare system. Well, we are right here paying the price. And our government is just shoving a big middle finger to our face every chance they get. So the big story of this week, obviously, was Joe Kent, the former director of the U.S. National Counterterrorism Center, resigned. And he put out this letter. You've probably read the letter by now. You've probably seen the story. But Joe Kent resigned and claimed that the war in Iran was specifically at the behest of Israel, that we went into Iran, that we've bombed Iran, that everything we've done has specifically been because of Israel and their commands. And Iran posed no threat to the United States, which aligns with what Trump and Tulsi Gabbard told us, right? Trump and Tulsi Gabbard both said that we obliterated the Iranian nuclear program, right? We said that just this past summer. Tulsi Gabbard even said that Iran was not continuing to enrich uranium or stockpile uranium. And then you had Caroline Leavitt, who put out a statement saying that there was never a threat, that a threat never existed to the homeland. So what Joe Kent is saying here is backed up by Trump and Tulsi Gabbard as far as no direct threat here to the United States. But here's the situation. You obviously have Trump supporters, the diehard Trump supporters, because I say Trump supporters because that can mean a lot of different things. It can mean people like me who simply voted for him, right? Who are very critical of Trump when he's not America first. But it can also mean the far end of the spectrum where there's those folks who just never will stray from the herd. And then there's people who are very critical of Donald Trump who voted for him but never really loved him, right? I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. But when you look at this situation, you have people who are piling on Joe Kent or putting Joe Kent on their shoulders, right? Who are saying, this guy's the greatest guy ever. There's some people saying, oh, this guy's the worst guy ever. He's a traitor. He stabbed Trump in the back. He's totally wrong. I'm glad he's gone. Blah, 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 blah. But one of two things is going to be true in this scenario. Either Joe Kent is right. Iran posed no threat. Israel pulled us into this war. Or Trump made another terrible hire in another key position, right? One of those two things has to be true. Because either Joe Kent is totally right or he's totally wrong. And if he's totally wrong, and he has such bad instincts and such bad understanding of what we are told is the largest state sponsor of terrorism in Iran and all of these different things, why was he put in that situation to begin with? Trump even said that he was weak on national defense. Then why was he put in a counterterrorism position? And you add that to the fact that the FBI supposedly was investigating him for leaking classified information from these meetings that he was a part of. But the FBI was investigating him, and they're claiming that he was leaking classified information, but they left him in this position, in this key counterterrorism position, until he just decided to leave of his own volition. Most things in life, like I've said on the show before, they come down to just basic logic. If you look at the situation logically, somebody has to be lying. And if we are talking about a federal investigation, do you think somebody who's leaking highly important classified information that could lead to national security threats? Do you think if they were doing that, they'll be left in their position and not fired or not put on leave or not any of these things, and they'll just decide to just hang it up one day? That doesn't sound right to me. And people are bringing up previous statements when it comes to Joe Kent back in 2020. There's some more recent statements even when Joe Kent was a proponent and actually supported intervention in Iran. And I'll say a few things about that. Number one, it's okay to change your position on things. One of the tweets that's going around is from 2020. That was 6 years ago. My view and millions of Americans' view on Israel, on foreign entanglements, on Iran has greatly changed over the past 6 years. Right? There's a lot that's happened. There's a lot more we've learned, and just a lot more has come to light since 2020. So I'm willing to give people a pass, and I hate when people hold something somebody said 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 10 years ago against them like it's some sort of dunk. Like, oh, you changed your mind once in the last 6 years? What an idiot. You're a flip-flopper. Well, no. If you hold the exact same positions as you did 6 years ago with no change, with no development, with no layers added to that, then you're not thinking. You're not evolving. You're not growing. You're just a mindless person who's turned their brain off. That's the reality. And so there's layers to what's happening with Joe Kent. Obviously, he had access to information that you and I don't. But we have to decipher, is this person being honest with us or not, right? Because there are some contradicting statements, right? What he's saying right now, I happen to totally agree with, and I think the evidence supports. But he had positions in the past. So what led him to change? And I think the important part to highlight that nobody else is talking about is the fact that during a lot of these statements that he put out, whether they're tweets or social media posts, he was a candidate for Congress at that time. And what most people don't realize about when you're running for Congress, and I can say this as a former congressional candidate, most congressional candidates are paying consulting firms who post and message on their behalf, who train them on messaging, who say, we've done these studies, we've done this focus group, this is what plays really well in your district, right? Your district is 60% pro-Israel, so we really need to lean into supporting Israel. That's number one. Number two is when it comes to high-profile Republican donors, the number one group that donates the most to Democrats and Republicans alike are Jewish donors who support Israel overwhelmingly and support U.S. military engagement in Israel overwhelmingly. So what do you need to win a congressional race? You need a lot of money. You need votes, and the only way you get votes is with a lot of money. How do you get that money? Big donors. Nobody can run a congressional campaign on small dollar donations. Nobody's ever done it successfully. And the reason being is you can go to a rally, and I would go to a rally. I'd speak in front of 500 people and get a standing ovation. And I would leave that room with maybe 100 donations. And the average donation was between $10 and $20. So let's say I left that 500 person room who gave me a standing ovation, and I left there with $2,000. And then, at the time, the max that you could give when it came to a primary and a general, but from an individual, was $5,800. So I'd speak and get a standing ovation from 500 people, and my opponent would call up one of his buddies and get a $5,800 check, in which then he could reach thousands of voters more than I could, just based on that chunk alone. And so there's all of these reasons why he might have had these previous opinions or never had them to begin with. And I think the frustrating part when it comes to our politics is voters will say, we need authentic candidates who are real, who don't use consultants, who don't do this, who don't do that, who don't take any of the big money. But the minute that they don't, that candidate doesn't 100% align with Trump or the prevailing narrative, they're dismissed. And the reality is most voters would rather have their butts kissed than have an authentic candidate who will push back against the prevailing winds, who will push back even against their own party or their own party leaders. The same people that we claim to want, we won't support. And we won't do our own research. We won't do our own homework. We won't do our own work to discover the candidates who are actually running on America First platforms. So that's why we get the big donor candidates. That's why we get people probably like Joe Kent in this circumstance who were leaning into a position that they didn't really even hold because they needed money. And they did studies and their consultants told them this is what you need to win votes. Because we can't see through the smoke screen, the very thin smoke screen that is put in front of us. And that's why so many right-wingers, they hate Thomas Massie right now. It's not because of his voting record. It's not because of his platform. It's not because of his beliefs. They hate Thomas Massie because he's gone against Trump. He's gone against the party. And again, I am split on Thomas Massie. I don't agree with him on immigration. I don't agree on some of his libertarian ideas. But he's been one of the most solidly consistent conservative voters, voting members of Congress. And yet we are painting him to be the enemy, right? He is not America First. He's not MAGA. But you know who is MAGA? Lindsey Graham, Mark Levin. Those people are MAGA. But Thomas Massie, the guy who has like a 99% Liberty score, he's MAGA. But Lindsey Graham, who has like a 40% Liberty score, he is MAGA, right? Thomas Massie is not. One of the issues, so you have this whole Joe Kent saga that's ongoing. One of the issues that I have with Joe Kent in this situation is he went on Tucker Carlson, and in his letter, right, he said all these good things about Trump, that Trump's in his resignation letter, that Trump, he demonstrated America First policy in the past, and he was actually tricked by the Israelis, and he believes he can get turned around. Then he went on Tucker Carlson, and he says to Tucker, Trump is actually uniquely qualified to get us out of this, and that that he is the only one who can really deliver, and he has faith in Trump and all these different things. And my question would be, well, number one, if that's the case, if you have all this faith in Trump and you think he's uniquely qualified to get us out of the war in Iran, why would you resign, right? Why would you resign from your position if that's your belief? If you think that this president is so great, continue to serve him and encourage him through whatever means that you have to do what you think he is capable of doing, getting us out of Iran, right? So that doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really jive with resigning from your post. But the other portion of this that drives me absolutely crazy, and I see so many conservatives do it, is this constant excuse making for Donald Trump. It is constant. Nothing is ever Donald Trump's fault. It's always, well, he got bad advice, or the deep state stopped him, or, this person he hired was a bad person, or he got tricked by a foreign government, or his hands were tied, or the system was stopping him. It's never his fault. He is never held accountable. And what really frustrates me about that is, we're the conservative movement. We're supposed to be the movement of accountability, of individual personal responsibility, and yet for some reason when it comes to this particular person, he is the one person who can never shoulder the blame. It is never his fault. Right? When perfect example is right here in with Joe Kent. What are the staunch Trump supporters saying? They are saying Joe Kent's an idiot. He should have never been there. Good riddance. I'm glad he's gone. But it's not Trump's fault for hiring him, right? Joe Kent was a terrible hire. According to these people, he's a terrible hire, terrible person, total moron, and Trump bears no blame in hiring him. So there's this constant sort of psychological game, all these hoops that you need to jump through to somehow keep Donald Trump totally clean and blameless. And I'm tired of playing this game because you have to blame Trump in one way or another. Either the results are really bad, right? We have no mass deportations, housing's up, gas is up, groceries, inflation is actually rising higher than expected this quarter. Jobs are not growing at a rate. The job market is totally frozen, totally stagnant. Wages are stagnant, right? There's very little positive momentum in any way. And yet we are never allowed to say this is Trump's fault. If there's anything that you point to that's negative, for example, in Minneapolis, right? I've heard this a million times. In Minneapolis, Trump backed out, he bailed out, and people say, well, they were obstructing him. Tim Walz got in the way, right? All these leftists rioted in the streets. So one of two things then is true. Either Trump backed down, Trump is weak, or Trump doesn't care about immigration, doesn't care about actual mass deportations. One of those two things has to be true. He's either too weak or doesn't care. In this case, in this letter, Joe Kent was saying Trump got tricked by Israel and his advisors to go to war in Iran. So one of two things is true. Either he wants to go to Iran and he thought this was a good idea, he wasn't tricked. Or two, he's too weak-minded, not strong enough to make his own decisions or to make the correct decisions. So one of two things has to be true. If you want to save America, I mean, this is the message to conservatives and to Republicans, anybody on the right. If you want to save America, start by ending the constant excuses for Trump and the GOP. And we play this game constantly. I see it constantly on my own social media. Whenever I am critical of Trump or the GOP, oh, well, the Democrats are terrible. Yeah, I know. Joe Biden, what, you want Joe Biden back? No. If our bar is Joe Biden and the Democrats, we've totally lost. Right? That's our bar. Our bar is the brain dead zombie president that we had for 4 years, and if we're slightly better than that, that's a win. You're playing for peanuts, right? You're playing to lose at a slower pace. People like me, those on the true right who are more nationalist, who are being critical of Trump right now, we're critical of Trump because we want to win. Because we're not going to accept scraps. That's really what it's come down to, is we are simply accepting scraps from the dead carcass of MAGA. That's what it is we wanted mass deportations, which, if we're just trying to get rid of who Biden let in illegally, you're talking 2 million a year. That's the bare minimum just to get back to where we were in 2020 as far as the illegals living in this country. And we're told, well, now we're not going to do that, but here's 300,000 a year. And we're supposed to go up there and say, oh, thank you so much. Oh, this is great. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're not Joe Biden. Really? This is what we have sunk to, is begging for scraps. Begging for scraps from Trump and MAGA. Well, not me. I don't want scraps. I want to sit at the table. I don't want to be treated like a dog. You know, if we were, and this kind of came to my mind, been watching the World Baseball Classic. I'm a big sports guy. Football, baseball, basketball. If we were half as hard on our politicians as we are on the athletes of our favorite teams, we might actually get somewhere. Because when do we ever make excuses for the athletes on our team? Right? When a outfielder drops a fly ball, do we say, oh, well, the sun was in his eyes, nothing he can do about that? Oh, well, it was a really windy day. Oh, well, the ball had a little bit extra spin on it. Oh, you lost it in the lights. Actually, he was sick that day. He had a little cough. He wasn't really feeling his best. Would we ever do that? No, we would say, catch the damn ball. When a wide receiver drops a wide open pass, do we say, actually, it's a little slick out there today. Humidity level's a little high. Actually, that wasn't a perfect spiral. Actually, it wasn't perfectly in his hands. It was actually slightly behind him. He's got a little bit of a knee thing going on right now. So would we ever say that? Or would we say catch the ball? Because the difference is, in sports, we have high standards. The standard is you succeed. You win or you lose. The standard that we've come to accept in Republican politics is just be a little bit better than losing. Just be a little bit better than the worst case scenario. That's a loser mentality. That's a loser mentality. And this is what we get as a result. If you don't demand greatness, if you don't demand what you were promised, then you're not going to get it. These politicians already hate you. They already despise you. They already think extremely low of you. They already mock you to your face. So it's time to push back a little bit and say, I'm not giving you any more slack. And if you don't show up for me, I ain't showing up for you. Bottom line. All right, this is Appeal to Heaven with Jonah Schultz. Thanks again for joining me here today. Make sure you are liking, subscribing, sharing, and I'll see you here next time.